Hey, what's up?
Hello.
Let us start by, and I really want to start by asking this question. How do you see yourself like above all the labels that society puts on you? What's the description of yourself? How do you see yourself
On a personal level or on an activism level?
on any level that you want? No labels. Just how do you see yourself, or how do you want to be seen?
That's a hard question. um, I think, I don't know, thinking a bit more first on the activism level, I don't really think that there's a definition. And for a long time, I didn't know if I would see myself as an activist or not. I don't know what the line is because you have so many people that need to be fighting for a cause, not because they want to, but because it's a way of survival. And are they activists or are they just people trying to survive? So I don't really know um, what sort of definition or what is needed for me to be able to call myself an activist or not. But regardless of that, I kind of see myself as someone wanting to build a different, better, more just world. Um, and someone that wants to fight for it, which can be done in several different ways. And I think doing activism, doing something like this, fighting for what we believe in, is about empathy, is about resilience, about solidarity, and about a sense of community. Um, and that's kind of how I like to view myself and the work that I do.
Hmm, very interesting. Can you just talk a little bit more about the sense of community? Because I think it's really important.
Mhm.
How does it work? How do you feel it? How it has been so far?
Yeah, I think I have learned a lot in my, let's call it, activism journey, from especially different people from different countries and different realities, and people from the most affected areas, mainly in the global south, that really taught me how there is no activism without building this community. um, because activism is a way of collective resistance, and it is a fight that we can only do together, as one and with unity. And that's, we are building this little resilience community, I would say. And we need everyone by our side. We need young people, we need the working class, we need the different sectors of society that will be affected. And you can only do that, and you can only work together by building the sense of community between one another, and really wanting to learn from each other and fight together for something that is common to us all.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And now it goes directly into my next question, which is, can you be a good climate activist and still be a part of the system? Or what's the correlation between the system that created all those problems and the climate activists right now?
I don't know if it's even possible to be a climate activist without being in the system, because were born in it, we live in it. So even if we are aware about what system we are in and how it has created the climate crisis, because it hasn't, this system is not broken, it was made to be unfair. However, we don't have a choice but to live in it. And so I think that, like, it's so important to recognize the system that we are in, but also to be able to recognize that sometimes we don't have a choice but to comply with it in a certain way, or that sometimes we might do things that are within the system that we want to destroy. But the important thing is to be able to recognize them, learn from them, and kind of try to deconstruct this idea that we have of reality, because we live in this bubble, we live in this paradigm that is the system that we were born in. And so it's, I think it's a long journey to kind of deconstruct that is within us, but it's just natural. And that's, there's no such thing as a perfect activist. And I think the most important thing is to recognize these things and work in them, to be to in order to even destroy the system that we unfortunately were born in.
Do you think it's something possible to achieve in a lifetime?
I think it has to be. I don't have the answers, and I think a lot of the times people ask, like, activists, what keeps us hopeful, or what brings us hope to keep fighting. And a lot of the times I think it's not about hope, it's about a necessity to do so. And I'm saying this as a privileged person, so I don't really have this necessity on a daily basis, but so many people that don't have a choice but to fight, and even if they don't have hope, like there's nothing else they can do, because they need to fight to be able to have like the day after, to be able to live tomorrow, to have food tomorrow, etc. So I don't know if it's possible, but the only way to find out is to keep fighting. And I think the only way that we can continue living is to keep fighting. So why would we give up if we're not sure if we can do it or not? Um,
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you 100%. But still, I'm sorry for asking this cliche question, but where do you personally see hope? Or in what?
hmm. I think a lot of the times I feel very lost. Also, coming a bit back to the other question, because a lot of the times we kind of see the system being replicated within the movement, which is a bit scary. So a lot of the times I just feel lost and hopeless. But I think the moments where I am like, there's nothing else that I should be doing right now, is when we go out to the streets and we protest together, and there's just this invincibility in the air where you feel surrounded with people that believe in the same as you and are willing to fight for it as well. And I think one of the most important things in doing activism is to not let yourself be stuck in this little bubble, but instead to surround yourself with other activists, learn from them, really get to know them, and realize each second that you are not alone, and that so many people are here to fight as well. And not only that, but also to surround ourselves with people that maybe are not activists and maybe don't care that much about the things that you do, but to not, to not be alone in this little hopeless bubble of anxiety, and just doomism. I think it's so important to still surround ourselves with other people, and to keep doing things that we love, and to realize that we can also do activism in different ways. And we will never be able to be present in all of the protests, in all of the meetings, in everything that happens, but we can also do activism by doing things that we love, like playing music, doing arts. All of these things can come together, and we can take a little bit of what we love and give it out to the world and to the cause, and that can be enough. So I think that's one of the things that keeps me hopeful, is to think about all of this as a whole, and how each of us can do a little bit for this cause and to fight for it.
Yeah, very interesting. I totally agree with you. And if you look to your ancestors, the last century activists, there were many artists that didn't participate directly into protest, but they did participate by creating pieces of revolutionary art, and a lot of very famous ones, the Frida Kahlo or Dali or French writers. All of them didn't directly participate in the public uprising, but they all participate with their art, which is very, very important as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, I thank you for your answer, and I agree with you. But meanwhile, you were talking about the activist was trying to protect itself from the perversion of the system. Now I want to ask you about that. Do you think there's a big influence of the bad things in your own movement, and do the activist movement, specifically for the climate, have any kind of implemented system or something to protect themselves from this perversion of the system?
I think that's, first of all, that's something that the movement and everyone needs to work on all the time, and it's kind of a life journey. But I think that, like, there's no specific structure to prevent this from happening. I think it's about each person that is part of the movement being aware of it, and wanting to improve, and wanting to know better, and wanting to educate themselves. And I've been in activism groups where something like this would happen, and someone would call us out and be like, well, you're replicating the system we are in, like the things that you're doing is structurally discriminating. And even though maybe the people that were doing that didn't realize before, they wanted to learn, they wanted to talk about it, they wanted to improve and educate themselves. And I think that's the key. in this movement to want to do that, and to not be afraid of being called out, but instead to wanting to improve yourself. This being said, and I don't think I'm in the position to really talk about this because I'm not the one that is being affected by these discriminations that are structural, but they do exist in the movement like they exist anywhere else. And the movement, I mean, the climate movement, as we know it and has it kind of boomed in 2019, is very privileged, and it's very Eurocentric as well. So I think this is something that is still being deconstructed and kind of unlearned from the activists, to be able to really focus and be led by the most affected people, that unfortunately sometimes is not happening because there was this really big boom of the climate justice youth movement, where, you know, the image that we see on television are a bunch of white kids fighting for their future, but it's not about fighting for our future, it's about fighting for the presence of so many people already. So for example, you would hear the phrase, our house is on fire, but the houses of the people in the most affected areas have been on fire for decades now. The climate crisis didn't start in 2019. So I think this is something that we need to improve our communication about, and also realize that it's not us in Europe that will lead this struggle, but the most affected people will.
It's very interesting because it made me think about one thing in particular, which is it's already known by this point that we care a lot more about when it's white people suffering than other races, and it's been once again seen in this later tragedy of Ukraine, where we accept the refugees from Ukraine very easily and we help them with everything we can, but then at the same time we don't care about the refugees from Syria and other countries. So, and this combined with what you just said, don't you think it would be like a lot more effective to, or is a lot more effective to basically show you as white kids than show you as a global community?
How would that be effective?
Because we will get the support of the majority of European population, which is the population that holds a lot of power, right? An American population, of course.
Yes, but then action wouldn't be taken in the places where it has to be. And something that we need is, for example, global North countries funding loss and damage to the countries that are already being destroyed and don't have the means to prevent it. So it's not only about, you know, obviously we need to cut emissions, but we can't cut emissions if the same people that have been paying for the crisis will continue paying. So there's a debt from the global north to the global south, because we know that historically the global north is responsible for the climate crisis, and that needs to be paid. There needs to be financial support, not only for adaptation and mitigation, but especially for loss and damage for all of those countries that didn't contribute to this crisis but are suffering the most. For example, the entire continent of Africa is responsible for less than 5% of global emissions, but it's the continent that is the most vulnerable to the climate crisis. Or we see, for example, countries like Colombia that are also heavily affected already and that are deadly for environmental defenders. And you see people fighting for their lives being killed for it. And this needs to be talked about and this needs to be fixed. So I think that, you know, framing it as a fight for the future does not only exclude all of this, but it also doesn't bring the urgency that we need and that the people that are already being affected need.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. Although I was thinking about, do you think like we European, we just are egocentric and don't care about all those population or care very little? Or do you think it's something that the system imposes in us?
I think it is systematic at first. I think, you know, we are not taught about this in schools. Nobody tells us about this. And I think it's kind of like what I was saying regarding being an activist within the system. I think a lot of it is our own individual responsibility and will to to educate ourselves and to unlearn all of these things that the system imposes on us. Yeah, and that I think, yeah, I think that lost
What is
here.
what is the biggest myth that you have heard about climate activists or about, I don't know, ecology?
I think there are a few. The ones that come to my mind immediately
The most
are the
harmful one.
I would say the overpopulation one. That you also see, people considered big climate activists promoting it,
Mm,
which basically means that which basically imposes that overpopulation is one of the things causing the climate crisis.
mhm,
But this overpopulation that is being talked about is actually the population that is suffering the most from the crisis and that didn't contribute to it. Um, because I mean, we know that in this system, rich nations are responsible for 92% of global emissions, and the richest 1% of the world population are responsible for double the pollution produced by the poorest 50%. So this overpopulation is just a very harmful and even racist myth that tries to put the blame in the people that actually didn't contribute to this. It's also it's because it's the 1%. It's the smallest amount of people that have created this crisis and that are profiting from this system that is killing the other ones.
okay, very interesting because it's actually one of the most common myths that you hear
Mm-hmm.
around. It's overpopulation. Although when we think about it just a little bit, it's a complete myth and doesn't make any sense. Because, for example, I don't know
Yeah.
if you know this, but in ancient Greece, the reason why in ancient Greece they left Greece to make new colonies around Mediterranean Sea was because they thought they have an overpopulation problem with just a few 100,000 at that time before they have overpopulation problem. So it doesn't make any sense. We have half of Siberia, we have Canada, which has only 30 millions people for the second largest country in the world. There's a lot of space. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting how it has been like one of the most common and most active because I've been hearing it
Mm-hmm.
since I was a child actually. Since I was a child, since
Yeah.
school, I remember it. It's very
Yeah.
interesting to think about it. So, what's the most common, what's the most urgent climate crisis that we are facing right now as a humanity?
I think the climate crisis as a whole is the most urgent struggle that humanity has faced. Also, because it is interlinked with so many other struggles. You cannot talk about climate justice without talking about social justice, racial justice, gender justice, and all of these. Because climate justice understands climate change has a complex problem of social justice and a political problem. So it is a political choice to be in this state that we are. And right now we are at 1.2 degrees of global warming. And science tells us that we cannot exceed 1.5 degrees. But the reality is that in a warming of 1.2, we are already in a catastrophic climate scenario. And this is a result of centuries of exploitation and oppression through colonialism, extractivism, and obviously capitalism, which is the system that we have talked about. Um, and when we talk about the climate crisis, maybe especially in privileged countries that are not as affected as others, we often talk about it as numbers, has projections, has degrees, has a very technical issue. But for many people, talking about it is talking about human rights, like the right to water, the right to housing, to health, to life. And so I guess to explain what is the most urgent, um, is also to learn for about everything that is already happening, to be able to see the impacts that this crisis is already having in our world. And I actually have part of a speech made by a friend of mine that is Adri Mafioletti, and she is an indigenous activist from the south of Brazil. And she she made this speech after a strike in Stockholm, where it was interesting because many other activists from the global south talked, and some of the things that they said were just so powerful. And there were, for example, people saying that that was the first time that they felt safe striking, and they weren't afraid to not be able to go back home after. But this speech that she said begin with, imagine waking up in the middle of the night with the wind blowing at your window. It's another cyclone that has arrived. Your clothes are wet, you pick up your brothers and run, your house is underwater. You don't know your native language because it was taken from you before you were born. Your ancestors were kidnapped and raped. They tried to whiten the population by raping and killing their people. And now your name is Italian, German, Portuguese, Spanish. They took everything from you. At 6 years old, men will try to exploit your body. You grow up with your own lands under attack and exploitation. And she explained that this is the story of many indigenous peoples and Brazilians to this day. And for example, other things that were talked about were that in Latin America, the climate crisis is also already being heavily experienced, from fires to historic droughts. And in Argentina, more than 1 million hectares of forests and swamps burned in 2020, and over 200 people died from it. Then, for example, like I was mentioning, Colombia is the most dangerous country in the world to be an environmental defender. And last year, 65 environmental defenders were killed. So for many, fighting isn't a choice, it's a matter of survival. In countries such as the Philippines, typhoons destroy lives and livelihoods, and floods reach third floors of buildings and destroy agricultural land. So the climate crisis is happening now. And it is urgent to take care of it. And we can also talk about Portugal, for example, that is facing a severe drought. So it's already affecting us as well. Just sometimes it's not framed as the crisis that it is. But so because of all of this, I would say that the climate crisis as a whole is the most urgent crisis that humanity has to fix, also because it is so interlinked with everything else.
Who do you think will die first, the humanity or the system that we live in?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you think will die first, the humanity or the system that we live in? The end of the world or the end of the capitalism? What do you think?
I think, like the quote says, it is easier to imagine the end of the world at the end of capitalism. But what is most likely to happen, I want to believe that is the end of capitalism. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I believe it's possible.
So how is those problems that you just mentioned being addressed by the state and the system, so-called system right now? Are they being even addressed?
I would say that they are. I would say that especially after the boom of 2019 climate mobilizations, governments started talking about it, institutions started talking about it. All of a sudden, the climate crisis was present in every speech and every debate. But after this, I would also say that words mean nothing when they are empty. So in 2019, we started seeing so many governments declaring a climate emergency. But what did they do about it? Nothing. It's just a symbolic action. It's just a nice expression to pretend that they're doing something. I mean, in Portugal, we saw a climate emergency declaration at the same time as we saw new exploitation projects, as we saw a new airport projects, as we saw all of these environmentally danger and harmful projects. And this is a little bit of what is happening and is being replicated all over the world. So no government is doing enough, and no government wants to be doing enough because it's not of their interest. Their interest is still profit, and not people. I mean, we can, for example, take the example of COP26, which was the United Nations Climate Change Conference that happened in November of 2021. And we heard a lot that it would be the last chance of fixing the climate crisis. But as climate activists, we knew from the start that it wasn't, that nothing would happen there, and that the last chance to fix the climate crisis isn't the governments, it is the people that are in the streets fighting. And so this climate summit, I think this kind of describes what governments are, or are not doing. So this climate summit had more fossil fuel industry representatives than the delegation of Puerto Rico, Myanmar, Haiti, the Philippines, Mozambique, the Bahamas, Bangladesh, and Pakistan combined. It was the biggest delegation. It was fossil fuel companies' representatives. In the final text of this conference that brought together so many governments, it says that the importance of climate justice is recognized for some. So they recognize that for some, climate justice, the concept of climate justice is important, which just tells us how much they don't care and they don't see it as a real thing. And to top this off, during this conference, where governments from all around the world were discussing how to supposedly mitigate the climate crisis, it was exposed in a report that 76 countries that were currently sitting there were planning on drilling at the very least 816 new oil and gas wells between that November and the end of 2022. So what are governments doing? I would say that not even nothing, but they're doing worse. They're worsening the climate crisis while telling us lies, basically. So, like I said before, I don't believe that the climate crisis can be fixed within the system that created it. And I don't believe that the solution will ever be in the hands of governments or institutions that could be fixing this already, but choose not to.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because I remember a story that a friend of mine told me a few weeks ago. He's from another country, another European country, a rich European country, and he told me that in his country there's a new government project where the government will only do governmental contracts with companies that have a certain carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really interesting because when you hear about first time, you think it's a good thing, but then you realize that it's a really tiny limit and a limit that a small business could not comply. So probably the only one who will comply will be the big businesses that have money to invest and to buy new equipment and to do all this innovation. And so we will start seeing the big businesses that had this money to change to take over the all governmental contracts. So basically, the big will become bigger and the smaller will become even smaller. It's very interesting because basically it's all supposedly done in the name of ecology, when in the end it's all about capitalism. And that brings me to the next question, which is, what is greenwashing?
So greenwashing is basically when companies, businesses, governments pretend they're being eco-friendly when in reality they are not. So this can be seen in several different ways. We can take the example I just gave about the conference, for example, that pretended that it would be so green and really cared about climate change, and then it was just basically a fair of greenwashing where all of the countries had these little spaces where they would advertise their climate-friendly policies that really are not doing anything. And we also see greenwashing, for example, in the world of fashion, beauty, lifestyle, where saving the planet is trendy, or green is the new black, and all of these things. But we have to keep in mind that labeling something as sustainable doesn't mean that it actually is. And we see, for example, banks, has the Standard Chartered Bank that is based in the UK, having slogans such as "here for good" and advertisements about how eco-friendly they are. But then you see, and it's actually one of the banks that is funding the destruction of the global south, and that since the Paris Agreement invested, I think it was something around $24 billion into fossil fuels. But still, you see these nice slogans and you see these nice advertisements with turtles and bunnies and nature, and they're so cute, right? So they must be doing something for the climate. And this is something that you have been seeing over and over and over again. So, I mean, I would say that greenwashing is just, it's a new way of making business, and it's a new way of profiting and lying to people. and it's part of this green capitalism that we often hear about, and we know that it's not possible to fix this crisis within capitalism, and the capitalism is the system that created it. But even though we know that, we have this whole narrative about, you know, being able to have a green capitalism and fixing the climate crisis within the system, which is basically just an excuse for the 1% to be able to keep profiting off of other people's lives.
Yeah, it's very, very sad. I would say very sad because basically they turned
Mm-hmm.
ecology into a commodity. And I'm gonna ask you that: do you think this transformation of ecology into a commodity, does it had been beneficial in some sort of way to the movement or not?
I think in a way, it might have been beneficial when we see that the climate crisis is something that now everyone knows about. And I think that made a lot of people that perhaps didn't know about the issue or didn't care enough to look for it, it made them want to know more, and it made them educate themselves. Or even if people are not super active fighting against it, they know that it exists. So in that way, I think it can be beneficial. But on the other hand, making it something so common and so just part, you know, it's framed as just something that exists, and it's just there, nothing special, you know, it's just something that we know that exists and everyone knows is there, and it's kind of this common thing that we hear about. But I think that also makes people not understanding the urgency of it, and it just being framed has some, like, nothing special, just something that is there as well, like so many others. So I'm not sure. I think that it is beneficial for it to be a subject that is known, but the way that this has been happening um, is not beneficial for anyone. It brought us greenwashing, it brought us this green capitalism fake narrative, and it brought us this, you know, I would say, the sense of being comfortable in it because it's something that it's just there.
Yeah, it's very, I always find it very funny as well because seeing a person like Bill Gates talking about ecology and how this is
Mhm.
important when at the same time he has probably one of the biggest footprints on Earth.
Yeah.
Because when he travels by plane probably to everywhere he goes and all sort of that things. It's just really funny because at the same time he's the guy who goes to TV and
Hmm.
says he's all in for the green and all in for the planet.
Hmm.
And we can see this kind of hypocrisy in all sorts of individuals and big companies that don't care. It's very interesting and very sad, this sort of society of image. And the majority of us fall for it, right? Because I think, if I'm not
Yeah.
wrong, I was reading a study that shows that clothes or jewelry that supposedly says it's made by sustainable standards, it's selling more.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
very, so capitalism basically used this slogan to sell even more to us.
exactly. Yeah. And it also made this, I think it made this kind of, you know, celebrities and and any person actually, but this fake sense of, if they say they're sustainable, then they want to be framed as heroes, as eco-friendly, and they do that to promote their own image as well, without actually doing any work.
Anything,
So
yeah. Very, very
I,
sad, actually.
yeah.
Do you think, and how do you think the majority of population, specifically our population, because it's, I think I always prefer to talk about our society, our specific society, looks to this movement, to the climate movement?
Mm, I think that it's a little bit like how greenwashing started, I think, in the way that greenwashing started when the climate justice movement was starting to be a trend, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people thought, oh, people care about this. This is mobilizing people, so greenwashing started developing more and more. And I think when that was happening, so when these climate mobilizations would gather thousands of people, we got 20,000 people in Lisbon, 40,000 nationally, and I think when that was happening, most of society showed interest and wanted to join. But as the movement started developing and it stopped being something new, we noticed that most people that joined those strikes didn't really care that much. It was just something new. It was something they wanted to see what it was about. It was something even trendy, you know, like there was a time where going to strikes was trendy, like people would go and take photos, which is okay, but that's what happened. And then you see that the people that actually stayed and wanted to work on the movements are a little amount of people. So I think that now that, you know, the political reality and moments also changed, we are not going to get thousands and thousands of people again on the streets, probably. And it's not a trendy issue that everyone wants to be a part of the solution anymore. I think it's something that people are aware of. I think it's something that, you know, at least the younger generation knows about. But I also think that because it's not something new and it has been talked about for a couple of years now, a lot of different narratives have been created, and you see liberal narratives around the climate crisis, you see capitalist narratives around the climate crisis. So I think that it's still something that most of society is aware now, but it also enabled all of these different solutions per se that are not really solutions to be validated, I would say. And then there's obviously still part of the population that doesn't believe that this is a real issue, or that does believe it but doesn't think that it's urgent. And you even see political leaders saying this, and that that focusing on the climate crisis is a distraction from fixing our economy and stuff like this. So yeah, I think it's something that everyone knows about. Just the way that they talk about it, or that they believe it will be fixed, might be very dangerous at times.
Very interesting. Because in my humble experience, when talking to working class people, and I mean people that work normal jobs, hard working jobs, from nurses to agriculture workers or to essential workers, the majority of them don't actually care about it because they have much more bigger problems in their own lives.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna ask you, how does the climate change and how does the climate activism affects the life of that working class?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I want to start by saying that obviously, and I think it's something that the climate movement should sometimes be more understandable about, is that the climate crisis isn't the most urgent issue in everyone's lives. And a lot of the climate movement is made of privileged people, because we are able to think about this on our daily living. And even though it is an issue for everyone and it will affect everyone, but even though not at the same speed, it's like you said, there are people that need to think about how to put food on the table for their family on the next day. So the climate crisis is not their priority. And I think, you know, we need to be able to say that that's okay. But I also think that the movement as a whole needs to be able to communicate better how everything is interconnected. And I would say that the way that the working class is going to be affected, well, first of all, is because everyone is going to get affected by the climate crisis. It's going to reach absolutely everyone. The difference is that some have the means to protect themselves and some don't. And the working class, unfortunately, will not have those means to protect themselves, because they're constantly being exploited and they're being used to build the system that is destroying them. And then you also have much more clear examples. For example, small farmers that literally are not able to continue doing the job and the thing that makes their livelihoods, it is not possible anymore because of the climate crisis and because of the big corporations. And you see, specific examples such as small farmers not having water anymore, because all the water is going to the big corporations and to intensive agriculture and to all of these issues that feed the climate crisis. So yeah, I think, even though everyone is going to get affected, I also think that there needs to be a bigger effort from the part of the activists to reach the working class and to connect these issues and to not make them seem so separate as people still think they are. And another thing is that, the climate justice movement also advocates for labor justice. However, sometimes it does without doing it alongside the workers. And I truly believe that it is not possible to fight for someone without fighting alongside them.
Of course, yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, there are international campaigns and campaigns that we also have in Portugal, such as the Global Climate Jobs, that have a specific plan about how to make a just transition to a green society. And basically, in those plans, we know that throughout this just transition, that will fix the climate crisis in a way, but throughout this process, lots and lots of jobs will end, because there are industries such as the fossil fuel industries that need to come to an end. However, these campaigns and just transition has the concept say that even though those jobs will be destroyed, many other jobs will be created, and the people that will lose their job because of this transition need to be the ones prioritized to do the new jobs, and need to have trainings given to them by the government to be able to do this new job right away, so that nobody is left behind and so nobody is unemployed because of this, which is what you're seeing, and what you're seeing in Portugal with the with the closing of power plants, where hundreds and hundreds of people lost their job and don't have any guarantees by the company or by the government to find another job or to be able to even continue making a living. And this is what cannot happen. And this is what the climate justice movement needs to say, that it is not what we are fighting for at all. And this is not what we are advocating for.
What is this green society? You just spoke about it several times, and I'm wondering, what is the green society? What do you mean by that?
In very short terms, I would say that it is a society and an economy that puts people above profit. So it is basically
Isn't that socialism or communism?
Maybe it is. You tell me. Yeah, but I mean, it is a society built to be more just for everyone, and that leaves nobody behind. And it is a society that we want to build together after dismantling capitalism as we know it.
It's very funny because what you just said, because we are both from a region that has a lot of intense agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, I have been doing some personal research on the field, and I realized that the biggest agriculture farms here in this region are foreign capital. They're owned by foreign capital, by English, Norwegian, and some own African person. And it's very interesting that because it makes me think that they're here, they're exploiting the land, they're probably exploiting the people because they're not paying them enough, and they just don't care about the water. When the water will end, they just will go somewhere else because they are external capital. It's very funny because nobody does anything about it. So how do we put sustainability above profit? How do you manage to convince people of that? Because locals, at least locals, are losing with this transaction because they are being exploiting. Their land has been used by foreign capital, and when the land will be unusable, they will just go to another place. So basically, they're of course being exploited, the locals. So how do we explain the local population that they are being exploited? How do we talk to them and convince them to do something about it?
That's the question I ask myself as well. I think it's something that I'm still learning, and I think the movement itself is still learning how to do so. I
Of
think
course.
it's a lot about communicating, it's a lot about listening to people, about going there, talking, not just talking about them, but talking to them, and listening about how their work and the work that is imposed to them is affecting their daily lives, and having a conversation about how this is actually all connected. But I think it's also important to realize that not all workers will be willing to rebel against the system, because they need that work to be able to live. Um, so you have a lot of examples of the climate justice movement, for example, blocking polluting infrastructures where people work, and the workers there being against that, because even though they don't like what they're doing, even though perhaps they are even aware about how harmful for the environment that is, they are also aware that it's the job that they have, and it's the job that they need to continue having in order to continue living and having enough money for the next day. So I think it's a tricky situation that I don't have an answer to yet. But I think it's a lot about listening to people, and really not doing stuff without them, and not doing things against them.
Very interesting. What do you think? There is this, I forget his name, and probably I'll tell you later, but there's this Norwegian thinker, and he tells that in order for activism to be effective, you need to be destructive. You need to inflict damage on the private properties of the company. What do you think
Andreas
about
Malm.
that? Is his
Andreas
name?
Malm. Yeah. From
Okay.
the book How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Yeah.
What do you think about that?
um, I think that, you know, he begins his reflection saying how the climate justice movement has been striking, has been bringing thousands of people on the streets for years now. He even begins with like these uh, like at first seeming incredible descriptions of protests that seem so powerful, and then he says this happened in like 2015 or something. So many things that seem powerful at first, and then you notice like this happened years ago, nothing changed, this actually had no impact at all. I mean, we had strikes in 2019 where we had like 7 million people on the streets around the world on the same day, and what has changed from it? Like, we're still increasing emissions, people are still dying, the climate crisis is still getting worse and worse and worse. So how do we fix it if it's not by protesting in the way that we have done so far? And so in that way, obviously, he is right, and he has a point where we need to be disruptive, we need to be able to stop business as usual, because I think that these mass mobilizations that have been happening have almost became a part of the status quo, is not something disruptive anymore, is not something that makes business as usual stop anymore. And that's what we need to do in order to be heard and in order to make something change. However, I also do believe that when he says that activism needs to be destructive and we need to destroy the property, it is possible to do that without harming the people that are not the ones responsible for it. And I think that that is something that can be quite dangerous with, for example, civil disobedience, where sometimes you end up affecting the people that you supposedly are trying to save. And I think it's a very fine line between that being necessary to be able to be heard, and that just affecting the people that you shouldn't affect. So I think it's something that needs to be careful thought about, but I do agree with what he says. And I do think that what we are doing right now means nothing, and it's kind of politically a zero. Like, honestly, like, I think these all of these protests and stuff, we have done them before. It's so easy for us to do them. It shouldn't be easy. Activism should be uncomfortable. We shouldn't be used to doing things over and over again and almost being able to do them automatically. That's a bad sign. That's a sign that, we've already been doing it for so long. Nothing happened from it. Why do we keep doing it? Why don't we change?
Interesting, nice, very interesting. Do you think we should limit production of commodities specifically in order to fight the climate crisis? Impose certain limits on certain goods? For example, it's at this point it's very well known that first, in many cases, first we create a product and then we create the desire in the people for marketing. First we create a new iPhone, a new version of it, then we create the desire in the people to buy this new version. My question to you is, should we as a society impose limits on the production of certain goods?
I would say so. I think that another myth that runs around and that I believed in for a long time, and I had this like journey of deconstructing that within myself, is that the consumer dictates the production. And like if you don't consume something, then that's the way to fight against it, which is just not true, because
Exactly.
production is the one that dictates the consumer, like you said. So yeah, definitely I think the target should be the production itself and never the consumer.
Let's wrap up this and end this with one last question. Do you think that the individual, the particular individual, has a role to play in the climate crisis? And then does he has a blame on playing or not playing it?
I think that is another myth. We have loads of myths. I think that when it comes to creating the climate crisis, there is a lot of this individual narrative that blames each of us and says that each of us is a little bit responsible for the crisis we are living, which is just bullshit. We know that the 1% is the one to be responsible. We know that rich nations are the ones responsible. And like I said, we know that 92% of the emissions come from 1% of the population. So it is just not true that everyone is responsible. So in that sense, I think that's a very, even like it's a harmful myth even, that just tries to blame individuals that are the ones being affected. And then along with that, the other myth is that since we all are a bit responsible, we all should individually fix the climate crisis by changing our daily habits, for example, which is ethically relevant, but it is not politically sufficient, not in the state of the crisis that we are in. It's not because I stop using, I don't know, plastic straws that I am fixing the climate crisis. It's about collective resistance. It's about people power, because as individually will not be able to fix the climate crisis, will not be able to overcome this powerful 1% that keeps profiting off of our destruction. But us together, we really are stronger. And as a whole, and has, we began by talking about this building a sense of community, and I think it is by being together hand in hand with the most affected sectors and by building this community between ourselves and having this collective resistance that we are able to fix the climate crisis. And this can even be proved just by mathematics. So we can try to check if 1,000 people do all of these individually supposedly sustainable actions and change their life to make everything sustainable. Do not travel, do not eat meat, do not use plastic, all of these things that are imposed by corporations and by green capitalism to us. If we do the math, then even if those 1,000 people for 80 years of their lives do all of those things, if they just for once got together and fought against, for example, a power plant, and that power plant would shut down, this would be 15 times more efficient than all of their lives restricting themselves to this sustainable way of living that greenwashing is imposing us. So I truly believe that even though it is still relevant for each of us to do all of these, ethical and relevant sustainable actions, it is not what is going to fix the crisis, and the solution is in collective power and in collective action.
And that's a very beautiful way to end it. The power is in the collective action. And I totally agree with you. I believe in the power of community. And I hope
Yeah.
that's what's going to save us all. Thank you very much, darling, for having me. And yeah, that's all.